Anyway, I'm Rafe Needleman, and it's my job at CNET to cover startups and mobile technology, so I am just thrilled and honored to be here tonight to talk about one of the most interesting and kind of the weirdest new trends that I've had the pleasure to look into. We're talking about a new platform, wearable computing. Is this the ultimate tech beachfront? This is a real product. This is called the Parvis WL1000 wrist wearable wireless computer. That's running, I believe, a version of Windows, and I'm sure that's a very valuable product, or was at one point for some people. Seriously, this is going to be huge. This is me at CES just a few days ago. That is a Sense6 smart goggles. That is a very weird product, but it's a development platform. But I'm just pointing out that this is a nascent field. And to be serious about it, though, as we all know, at least we all think that the wristwatch industry is in trouble, right? Because young people, future technology buyers, the young people, no longer need watches to stay organized. They're using their smartphones. That's where they tell time. The smartphone always has the time on it. So the wrist is opening up. It's fair game. We don't need to carry watches anymore, but we do need to carry a phone. And more importantly, the phone is becoming a computer. So the question is, how do we access it? Is just picking up the phone and using it as a pocket watch the right way to do it? One more thing I think that's really important. One of the guys on the panel kind of threw this out there, I think, a while ago. We use time. We used to use time as a rather blunt instrument to coordinate ourselves, our lives, our interactions. Before we had real-time links to everybody, if you wanted to meet somebody or talk to somebody, you had to coordinate a time and a place, and you needed a watch to help you stay on track. But time is not what it used to be. Now we coordinate in real time, ad hoc. It's not so much about meeting at a certain time or a certain place. It's the ability to communicate with each other that has replaced the need to keep time. We are also recording everything. How many people checked in on Foursquare or tweeted their tuna fish sandwich? We are recording. You did? OK. We are recording where we go, what we eat, how much we weigh, where we run, when we land at an airport, our pulse. All that stuff. We are just sucking all this data in. For active people, we're strapping cameras on our heads and recording our activities. We can now even get real-time dashboards of what we're doing. We'll be hearing a lot more about that in just a minute. So the question is, can new smart devices that we wear on our wrists, on our eyes, instead of these clunky old antiquated eyeglasses, can they augment, not replace, but augment the smartphone? Act as the interface to it, while the smartphone remains the link to each other and to the cloud and to other people. A lot of people think this is inevitable. If you look at what happened to the pocket watch or the wristwatch, it's kind of illustrative. In the 1920s, most people still used pocket watches. Women actually wore watches as pendants. But in World War I, pocket watches didn't work very well for soldiers in a battlefield that was increasingly mechanized and synchronized. So soldiers started to wear watches, which the technology had advanced to the point where they were reliable enough. Soldiers came home with them, which made them, they were more convenient than watches, and not to mention more necessary, and they became an acceptable fashion. Could this happen again with smartwatches or with smart goggles? It probably can. I think it will. I think if you saw the products upstairs, you believe it's kind of inevitable. But we do have a few small challenges to sort out, and we'll be talking about some of these tonight. I'll list just a few. They're up there. Products I've seen so far in this space. I poke fun at the Sense6 smart goggles, but I've seen other products for real that are either redundant to the smartphone, reliant on it, hideously ugly, delicate, short battery life, and expensive. So I think the industry has a little bit of work cut out for it. Plus, we need a killer app. Now, what will it be? This WIMM device that I'm wearing here, which is actually extremely cool, this is an Android-powered watch. Tim is on the panel there talking about it. This gets my calendar over the web, my Google Calendar, so I always have my calendar here, and I don't have to enter it in. It's just here, which is really cool. What is the killer app for this platform? Is it health data? Is it timekeeping data? Is it Facebook, Twitter? Is it atmospheric data if you're into sports? There are several interesting products I want to blast through real quickly, and then we'll get into this discussion. They're all doing variations on this thing. This is the iPod Nano. This is the original smartwatch that is actually working. Even though Apple doesn't sell this as a watch, at CES, every other booth had a band for it. Okay, so we've got the Apple Nano, the iPod Nano, the iWatch. This is an Android-powered watch from Italy. Nice-looking product. This is the Motorola's motoactv. They were upstairs. This is the GPS-equipped fitness tracker and music player. We've got Sony Ericsson Live View, which is being sold as a phone remote. My remote, by the way, in my house is used as my phone is used as a remote for my TV. Now I have a remote for my remote. This is the Alerta Impulse. They're also upstairs. This is another alerting system. This one actually works on BlackBerry, which is, I believe, unique. This is the basis. I've written about this product. This is a very interesting product because on the back of it, it has sensors to measure your pulse, your galvanic skin response, and your blood oxygen level. And it's as big as a watch. I don't think it's out yet, but it's very cool. Let's see. We've got the MetaWatch, a new platform, totally new platform. They also have an analog version. One of our panelists here is from MetaWatch. This is a spin-out from Fossil. WIMM, which I mentioned, an Android-powered watch. They'll soon have an app store for this. This one is backed by Foxconn. In the eyewear space, there's four that's a little projector thing. And the Recon MOD Live, which is a product for skiers. It'll tell you how high up the mountain you are and that there's a tree right in front of you. So anyway, many of these, several of these companies are here. You saw them just now. I want to give a big thanks to the people who are displaying upstairs and showing us all about these cool products. And with that, before we get into questions about this space, we're going to be talking with some really cool people in this space. We have Rich Redelfs, who's an investor at Foundation Capital, who knows the space inside and out. Bill Geiser of MetaWatch, Tim Twerdahl of WIMM Labs. And we're going to get started with a brief talk from Dan Eisenhardt from Recon Industries, who can help us set the stage on, from his perspective as a vendor in the new and somewhat experimental market of consumer eye goggle devices. I also have to note that Recon just this morning announced that they've closed $10 million in funding. So congratulations. So here's Dan Eisenhardt to tell us more. I pass the baton.
Thank you very much, Rafe. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the invite. This is a fantastic venue. Thanks, Fred and Rafe, and to your team for organizing this. I'm honored to be here with these fine panelists. And thanks for showing up tonight. I hope you all went and saw our goggles upstairs. So raise your hand if you know what Recon Instruments is about and our products. Wow, okay. I always do this when there's a lot of people because that's free marketing, so a free survey. First, my accent is Danish. So stop wondering about where I'm from. South Africa, Belgium. I'm from Denmark, so you can start listening to what I'm saying. So I only have 9 minutes and 49 seconds left, so there's a limit to how detailed I can go. But hopefully I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about our world at Recon. Not Recon Industries, but Recon Instruments. And we do more than just ski goggles, even though the picture I have here today is beautiful landscape. I think it's Whistler. So we're from Vancouver, British Columbia. We're about 60 employees. Most of us are in that location. We've also got a location in London that just opened recently. And what we do is we deliver instant information. That's it. So we are claiming a new piece of real estate. And this allows you to access information without much effort whenever, during any activity, basically. So we're starting out in snow sports, but we're moving into multiple different verticals that I'll get into later on. And you'll see that here in 2012, we'll launch another 3 verticals. And hopefully, in a few years' time, you'll all be wearing Recon technology in various applications, even in everyday life. Just briefly, we are an Android-based system. We are a snap-fit solution, so we can snap into multiple partner brands. We've partnered with, just today we released Smith Optics and Scott. Those of you who are skiers know who they are. We're with Uvex, Brico, Alpina, and various other brands, and we keep adding to this portfolio. and we connect to basically any smart device because we're Android-based. It's easy to create an app. We announced a partnership with Polar last week, and we just keep adding to the list every week. We'll add contour cameras as well in a couple of weeks, which will allow you to view live video in your display, so you can actually viewfind and you know what you're recording before you actually set off. So I don't want to give the big marketing spiel today. I mean, you can go on our website, you can come to me afterwards and ask questions. I want to talk a little bit more about the challenges that we had developing this new product category, because it was extremely challenging for us. We started in a very poor time. I basically moved from Denmark to Vancouver in 2008, 2 days before Lehman Brothers went bust. And we had about $40,000 negative on the account. We had all met in school and went our separate ways, so we sort of came back at the worst possible time. And we had to create this business, this new product category. We had no idea how we were going to make it happen. The price points were too high. It was too bulky, big conservative players in the industry. But we knew we wanted to create something that would allow you to have access to information effortlessly, conveniently, without being tethered to bulky devices. And we also wanted to create something that was fashionable, because we've seen the heads-up displays have been around for over 20 years. How many in here actually have worn a heads-up display, apart from our products? Okay, so how many wear a wristwatch on a regular basis? Okay, so that's the challenge we have. It's fairly disruptive. So we had to go out in a recession, raise money, and we had to battle with these big conservative incumbents in the eyewear industry. We're talking about the Oakleys, the Smiths, the Scotts that are owned by huge eyewear brands, Luxottica, Safilo being the two biggest ones. And we had to convince them to change their mold and build cavities into this mold so that our technology could fit into their eyewear. The first time I proposed it, they just looked at me and said, "You're absolutely insane. First of all, I don't understand what you're saying because you've got a weird accent." And then they said, "But apart from that, this is crazy." So we went back and said, "Okay, how can we convince these guys?" So we said, "We got to build something first," and we built a prototype. Ended up going with a smaller player out of Boulder, Colorado, called Seal Optics. Even though we believe in modular solutions that can be snap-fit into any goggle brand, we thought, let's first go with a smaller player and then prove the concept, and then afterwards we'll go non-exclusive with basically any player. That was 2010, and now we have 6 players, 6 partners, and we keep adding as we go along. So some of the challenges that we had technically, obviously, I think I share with a lot of the panelists here today: battery power, small form factor, and another factor is interfaces. For us, is really big. So if you're not supposed to interact, you want something that's just out of your line of sight, yet still glanceable, so you can get the information when you want it. It has to be safe. It has to be small enough so that it doesn't make you look like a fool, because that's the last thing you want to do. When you put something on your face, you want to look cool, especially in this industry. So we had to make it really cool. So we couldn't change the eyewear that we integrate into too much. It had to be fairly cool still. And so with those constraints, we sort of made a lot of iterations of our technology. And we think now we've hit, we're not there yet, but we're definitely in a place where all the big brands are jumping in this industry, so we think we've achieved our goal. Obviously, we're shrinking it down, putting it in different other applications for the future. Sunglasses is one of them, and that's obviously going to be even more challenging. So the challenges I have up here are going to be sort of exacerbated if you think about how lightweight those frames are. For another thing which was extremely challenging was to convince the retailers, the distributors, and the consumers that we're here, and not just as a system that fits into goggles for skiing, because people look at us strangely and say, how can you make money from that? And it's seasonal and all this stuff. And we say, well, we could, if we wanted to, we could just be in this market. There's 72 million skiers and snowboarders around the world, 25 million goggles sold a year. So you can make money here. But that wasn't our vision. Our vision was to bring this just to the masses. And that's been very, very difficult to battle with these assumptions that are inherent in the industry. I'm going to just go quickly through the next 3 slides here, just showing a little bit more in detail who we are. So we've got 3 pillars. We've got our heads-up display systems that fit into multiple partner brands. We've got a cloud-based system where we store all the data. We're based on Android, so people can build apps and load them into the system. That gives us a more connectivity. And then we have later on a contextual analytics engine, which can take all this data and basically feed it back to you based on your location and different, your historic data, so that you can get decision support tools. Obviously, everybody's thinking advertising here, and that's where it's going to go, but not in the traditional sense. It's going to be actually value-adding information that means something to you in the moment. Big market, 500 million people just in the lead market. The action sports industry alone is about $20 billion already, so fairly big. And if you look at our roadmap, we are heading towards mass market, and obviously that means all like the 2 billion plus smartphone users out there. And that means we have to shrink down our technology, we have to get into sunglasses, spectacles, and eventually just an earpiece. I don't know if you've seen this, even a contact lens in research state where they've shown that it can have 1 pixel there on a contact lens. They tested on rabbits, and they apparently had a response to it must have worked. But that just tells you that it's feasible. We just have to really invest in this industry. Lessons learned. There are so many lessons that we've learned. There's probably a lot that we are yet to learn. I've just listed 4 up here. Launching this electronics product in a traditional soft goods channel with these big conservative players is extremely challenging on many different fronts. Always introducing a new product category, with a complex product, carries with it a lot of education and hand-holding. And when you have a recession, it makes it even more difficult. I've got 48 seconds left. Android, I think, goes without saying. It's fantastic. For us, it means we could get this great OS without having to pay license fees, a great memory footprint, and a lot of buzz around it. So that's really helping us, especially now with the app marketplace. Raising money, we're in Canada. A lot of people say, why are you up there and not down here? Well, there's great subsidies up there. So we've got fantastic programs up there. We've got something called SRED, which is 45% return on some of your R&D investments that you get the year after. So if you are live the year after, you get the money back. So and you can take loans out against them. And we've also been good at raising money in Europe. So because we've got lower labor costs in Canada, and so they see the arbitrage there. We've got 40 angels from Europe, and that's how we financed the first 3.5 years. Taking the plunge, so that was basically, come from a family where, not a family of entrepreneurs. My dad's an engineer, my brother's an engineer, all my uncles are engineers. Mother's a bioanalyst. Nobody ever started the business. So this was fairly new to jump, but I just met the right people. So it was just a fantastic experience when you meet the people that have complementary skills. Nobody can start a business on their own. In a university environment where we had a co-op between the business school and the engineering faculty, and we had everybody get up and auction and say, okay, what business is passionate, what idea is passionate to you? And for me, it was a swimming goggle with a heads-up display. And I pitched that, and people came over and thought that was cool. And then that developed into this roadmap we have today and this investment we've got this morning. And it's really arbitrary when you think about it. It was just an idea. Even going to Canada I walked into the wrong auditorium in my business school, and they were talking about exchange programs, so I went to Canada, and then getting this idea. It's just so arbitrary, right? So that just goes to show, I think, keeping an open mind and just having those antennas out and then connecting with the right people is really what it's all about. And you know it when you meet them. When you have something. Okay, so I'm way out of time here, so sorry about that, but that's it for me.
Okay, so we're going to talk about this interesting new market. I have a couple of questions. We'll have a chat here, and then it's time for your questions after that. So please don't forget, you can send us questions. How are they doing it? By SMS? By SMS. We will have the number up there momentarily. SMS them to the question bot, and they will appear on my magical device, and I will ask them, or not. All right, so now all these devices, we have one wearable device, two vendors of wrist devices. That's Tim Twerdahl here of WIMM and Bill Geiser of CEO, and then an investor in the space, Rich from Foundation. They all have very interesting and different origin stories. We just heard the one from Recon. And I want to hear just briefly where, Tim, we'll start just briefly from the WIMM device, the genesis, the origin story of that.
So WIMM is about 2 years old, but before that, our CEO, a guy named Dave Mooring, had been ideating on this for probably another 2 years, sort of incubating it, working with people, filing patents, and thinking about how to bring something to market. And what we've created, just for people who didn't get to see it upstairs, is actually a wearable platform based on Android that can be embedded into lots of things. A wristwatch is one of them. And he had this idea. He likes to think in puns sometimes, but it's ARM processor in here, an arm on every arm. And so a little over 2 years ago, a few of us connected with Dave. He was out of Rambus and Intel, so he was sort of the ingredient brand IP licensing side of what we do. And the rest of us were consumer products guys. And we brought that sort of bias to the table. And it's actually been a great marriage because it allows us to do something very highly polished and finished like a consumer product would be, but to take it to market in a way that's a little bit non-intuitive, at least for me, who came out of Roku and Palm and Netflix and places like that. So, one little startup, and I think a lot of you are probably thinking about, all the places your startup could go and what directions it might take. Couldn't enter all the markets we plan to enter with one brand, one marketing budget that's relatively small. And so licensing allows us to take it to a sports brand and allow them to build a device on it, and take it to a mobile phone operator and allow them to build a phone companion device, and to health monitoring companies, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really where we're going with it. And
Bill, MetaWatch has a somewhat different story. It's a spin-out, is that right?
We're spin-out from Fossil.
Fossil is a giant watch company.
Fossil is the 800-pound gorilla in the $50 to $500 fashion watch business, which brings up a point. A lot of people talk about the watch industry going the way of the buggy whip. The watch industry is probably more healthy today than it's ever been, just to give you a couple of facts. And these are very, very relevant, and I'll tie this together in a minute. There are about 1.4, 1.5 billion watches sold every year. Most of them are analog watches. I saw a number of people raising their hands that wear watches. I promise you, 97% of you are wearing analog watches, not digital. The reason is watches aren't utilitarian timepieces. If they were, we'd all be wearing watches we got with our Happy Meal. We're buying a fashion accessory, and I think this is where some of the confusion is on people kind of looking at this world through the left brain and saying, watches don't do a lot because phones do more. But you have to understand the psychology of why people wear things. People buy things because of brand affiliation, aesthetics, design. They're selling jewelry, and that's what watches really are. They're jewelry, they're status symbols. And it has profound implications for wearable devices. Trust me, I've had a front row seat to two of the biggest train wrecks in the smartwatch business, the Microsoft Spot Watch and the Palm Watch. They were phenomenal technology achievements, and they were incredible financial disasters.
Now, actually, that's one of my questions here, and I want to drill into that. Rich, I want to get to you in a second, but let's talk about those train wrecks. I have a Spot watch. It's in,
I got a bunch.
The back room. Yeah.
Come see me afterwards.
I'll sell you mine. You can complete your collection. What happened? And by the way, you're right. These are fundamentally transformative devices. I have to get all my shirts recut because your watches don't fit under my shirt cuffs. So you talk about fashion, and I think you've got a ways to go. But before we get back to that, what happened with the Palm and the Spot? That was a Microsoft project. That was freaking huge.
So How much time do we have?
For this question, about a minute or so. Yeah.
Okay, so let's just, maybe a different way to tackle that is what's changed back then. And I'd say a couple of things have changed. Number one, we've changed, we as consumers. And our habits have changed primarily because of the smartphone. We talk about product and timing and so on. I think the world of standalone watches, it was the wrong time. In the case of the Palm watch, the Palm product was getting slaughtered by mobile phones. So we entered the market as this thing, I think, was shrinking at 21% CAGR a year at least. In the case of Microsoft, I think it was ahead of its time. I think there were execution errors. I mean, I think the concept of selling a watch and then selling a subscription for the watch was probably was one of those things. What's changed today? We've changed. The business models have changed. All of a sudden, when you start putting radios in these products, it changes everything. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. It opens up all sorts of new partnerships. It's an attach rate driven business as opposed to a business where you're selling a standalone product. I also believe that much like when the quartz movement hit the watch industry 70 years ago, it took an industry that was about this big and in the next 15, 20 years made it this big, but it wasn't by selling more watches where watches were sold before. It was about opening new markets, new opportunities, and that's what's going to drive this wearable opportunity too. Now, the other thing is, my view, fashion will play as much a role, if not more a role, than function in these early stages. And the reason is, you wear fashion and you carry electronics. I heard you use the term, I carry my watch. We wear our watch. Watches are one of those things that they're effortless. You put them on and you forget about it. They're always on, they're always available, they're always at the periphery of your attention. And the thing that's in the back of our mind is, somebody might see me wearing it. And it better look good under those kind of bases. So that's why I think there's a lot to learn from the psychology of watch companies, because just a couple of data points. Fossil's added $1 billion in revenue in watch sales alone in the last 2 years. They have one brand, Michael Kors. Has anyone here heard of Michael Kors watches? Went from, in 5 years, 0 to $300 million. That'd be, I'll tell you what, Tim, would you guys like that?
I'm sure you'd like it.
I would love it. So there is incredible growth, but again, the psychology of those products calls for engaging the right side of our head, not the left side.
From the investing perspective, because I want to get to that here, we've got, I think, an audience of entrepreneurs. These are all entrepreneurial businesses. They all started differently. But Rich, where do you see the opportunities here, and where are you putting your fund in all the different places that wearables can be?
So we have not invested in anything in this space yet.
You're going to have a hard time getting out of this room.
Yeah.
You'll be mobbed.
Most new technologies start with a vertical, where there's a high value add, whether it be ski goggles or a lot of the traction now is around medical, self-monitoring of your health condition, little things like the Fitbit, which you clip on your waist. It's just got a simple accelerometer and gyro and those type of devices. So we think it's going to start with the verticals, and I think that this sort of general purpose computer on the wrist is a question of timing, and there have been failures in the past. Tablets had lots of failures over many years, and suddenly the iPad hit it and it took off. So it's a question of the right functionality and feature set at the right time. The watch, I think, is a difficult one. Let me ask an informal question, if I could, of the audience. How many of you don't usually wear a watch? And hold your hand up for a minute.
Yep.
Don't usually wear a watch. Look at this.
Look at all those prospects.
That's one way to look at it.
How many of you used to wear a watch, of those people who had your hands up who don't wear a watch? See, that is what I'm talking about.
So this is so everybody carries a cell phone now which has the time on it. So you don't need a watch. And by the way, I took an informal survey of my daughter's high school class. 90% do not wear a watch in high school. So the question is, I'm going to carry my cell phone around until I can put most of that functionality, at least the stuff I really care about, on this wrist. Otherwise, I don't need a watch. If I got to carry the cell phone anyhow, why do I want to have a watch that does some subset of that functionality? And so that's, I think, the big question as to when and how this is going to happen, unless I get some additional functionality that doesn't work so well here, such as the example you put that has the pulse monitoring and the galvanic skin response and those type things.
We've got two questions now that are bubbling up in my head. The first one is, if that's what you believe, then where do you see do you see the opportunity only in verticals like skiing or in medical, or do you see there as?
I think it'll start there.
Okay.
I think it'll start there. Now, if suddenly if I want to do health monitoring, and I either have to have a strap around my chest or a thing on my wrist, I'd probably rather have one on the wrist. It's a lot more comfortable, and I'm, at least wore a watch at some point in my life for most people, right? So you're okay with doing that. Now I got a device on my wrist anyhow. Now I can start offloading other functionality or having something that works in conjunction with my phone.
And Bill, how many more watches are being? How many watches are being sold a year? You said over 1 billion.
About 1.4 billion watches a year.
Who is buying them if these people no longer are giving them away?
China and India?
So I can tell you, the watch industry is made up of a couple of big segments. There is the high-end luxury watch. I'll give you an example, Hublot. I saw they published some numbers the other day. They sold 29,000 watches last year at an average price of $27,000 a piece. So that's a high-end market.
1% are watches.
So the high-end market is low units, high dollars. Then you've got the fashion watch segment where you've got companies like Guess. Swatch has a couple, their main Swatch brand is in there. Fossil's in there with either their own brands, their other brands. Fossil shipped 27 million watches. 2010, those shipments were up 40% year over year.
But what's
in 2011, it was up another 30%. So again, what I'm saying is I think people are buying watches, but they're not using them as a timepiece. It's more of a fashion accessory.
So we're here talking about smartwatches, where we're talking about high function, and at the moment, emerging fashion, if I may be generous.
In the Silicon Valley, anyway.
Thank you.
Yes, and I mean, hey, how many of you wore a calculator watch when you were in high school? Okay, that's fashion to me. Now, so we have to. Am I right? I mean, we need a killer app on these platforms. Your product is a ski product. You know your killer app. The WIMM product and at the moment. You're expanding, you'll have motocross, so I want a wine tasting watch, so I know what I'm doing. But Bill and Tim, are you looking for a killer app, or do you think you found it?
We're as I was saying, are about targeting the verticals that Rich mentioned, right? So we're talking to companies in health monitoring, for example. There are these wireless blood glucose monitors today you can wear a week at a time attached to your skin. Every 5 minutes, it's measuring your blood glucose. So if you're a diabetic, you can get a histogram here. You can get an alarm if you're peaking or troughing, need to eat or medicate. So we're talking to companies in lots of different verticals. That's just one example. And so we are really focused on the verticals. We're not trying to do the general purpose smartwatch.
I don't necessarily think that there's a killer app. I think this market is going to be thousands of markets of thousands. I don't think it's going to be a couple markets of millions. I'll give you one good example. We have a customer, one of our partners. It's a San Jose company called Smart Monitor. And they're doing something which I think is fantastic. They're using the accelerometer in our product to monitor the occurrence of an epileptic seizure and tremor. The goal is to compress the amount of time for a caregiver to be alerted to this person having a seizure, which has profound implications if it goes on too long. I mean, it can literally sort of zero out part of your brain. And so the ability to compress time in giving care to these people is really, really important. This is exactly the vision that we had when we first developed MetaWatch. The problem is developing these products, as Tim can attest, it costs millions of dollars and a couple of years to go develop it. And that's a heck of a risk to take when you don't know if the fish are going to bite. So what we try to do, and what WIMM is really doing too, is we're lowering the barriers to wearable innovation, where somebody with a couple $100 and an idea and some programming expertise can go test a concept and see what happens. So this is where I see the traction coming
Now, there are a half dozen, at least smartwatch companies and head, what do we call them, goggles? I don't want to call them, they're not goggles. What do we call them?
Heads-up display, micro-display.
Heads-up display, micro-displays, okay. Micro-display companies. Most of them are Android-powered, not all of them, but I want to talk about that in a second. But who is going to run the store? I mean, I assume this is an app store business, yeah? I mean, talk about that and how we managed to consolidate this. I mean, all these products are different. I mean, they might all be running on Android, but they're running on old versions of Androids and they're tweaked out because Android wasn't written for this form factor. So how are we going to get developers to write, to be able to spread their, the intelligence and the applications across the entire watch infrastructure economy?
You want to go?
Sure. Well, so yeah, we're Android-based, and you know, for those of you who are engineers in the crowd, it's very simple to develop for the platform, in that you just put an add-on into your development environment, takes care of our screen size and networking and things. The hardest thing about developing for the platform is not the coding. It's about thinking about what are the right experiences to elevate from, let's say, the phone or wherever you're used to doing your apps to the wrist, right? We call those micro experiences, we call them micro applications, because we want people to think differently about this space. If you try to replicate the app that's on your smartphone on your wrist, you're going to lose, right? It requires data input sometimes, there's too much information, there are multiple screens, right? It's about distilling that application down to what is really critical to tell the user when they're on the go and elevating that to their wrist or however else they may wear the device. And we fully understand that the smartphone is not going away. It's a great device. And we're not dependent on it, but at times, it's a great complement, right? So I can see something here and decide, yeah, it's worth pulling my phone out to get more information on that, or no, it's not. And we do some clever things, you know, and I think you do some of the same things where this two-way Bluetooth connectivity you have allows you to, let's say, flash a news headline across the bottom of the watch. And if that's interesting to you, maybe you touch it, and you can see a paragraph or a couple sentences maybe about what that is. And if you want more, you hit a button, and it launches the browser on your phone, and you're off and reading the whole thing by the time you've got the phone out of your pocket. And so that interplay is important.
But again, there are these many different device platforms. How does a developer decide which one to go to? Do they go by market share or by vertical? What do you?
You know, I think one useful way of looking at this business is to look at the radio. I mean, the radio inside our products, and particularly in our case, is what sets it apart from the traditional watch business. And you know, when you're building something this small, you've got radios inside it, you have sensors, you have displays, you have processors, you either have Android, we don't have Android, we've got a tiny little real-time operating system in there. So we're trying to solve different problems from what the guys at WIMM are doing. But essentially, we both have the same problems, as does Dan with Recon. And that is, you can think of all these components as a family. And you can think of power as food. Who are you going to starve? Because you can't feed them all. I mean, that's the reality of this thing. Unless you want to go charge this thing about every 3 or 4 hours, you're going to have to starve somebody. In our particular case, what we decided to do is, instead of putting, what do you have, like a 700 megahertz?
ARM11, yeah.
ARM11. We have a TI MSP 430 that when you really kind of soup him up, he's running all out at 25 megahertz. I mean, we're optimizing power. We spent months just trying to figure out how to turn the vibrating motor on and off in an intelligent way to conserve power. Yeah. So, but the whole thing is, we want our radio on and our display on 24/7. The issue with us on the radio is we're a notification platform. We want to be the FedEx of push notifications. If you absolutely positively want to deliver a notification to somebody and have them see it when it was sent, man, there's no better way to do it than this.
How often do you have to recharge your product?
It depends on, obviously, the scenarios, but call it 4 to 5 days in this world today.
Like an old Nokia phone. Back in the good old days.
You know, it's kind of funny. When we launched, in 2006, we started selling Bluetooth watches. And we did it in partnership with Sony Ericsson. The MBW 100, 150, 200 were products we designed in conjunction with our partnership with Sony Ericsson. And it was interesting. We launched them through some fossil channels and low numbers under our brand, and through Sony Ericsson's channels under their brand. The feedback we got from the fossil channels was, you have to recharge this thing? How often? Once a week? Get it out of here. We can't sell it. In a wireless store, it was, oh, it's Bluetooth? How often do you have to charge it? Once every 7 days? It's like a technology breakthrough. I have to charge Bluetooth once a day.
Yeah.
So
Depends on your perspective.
that was one of the lessons, was positioning. Do you call it a watch, or is it a mobile accessory? We found a lot more success as an accessory.
Now, in addition to the hardware and the applications, there is more involved here in the wearable economy. There are the cloud services, the smartphone, the apps, whatever radio services are necessary. Are there opportunities there? Do any of you see, Rich in particular, are there cloud services, for example, that could help these products of this economy take off?
Well, I think, you know, for cloud services, you've got to connect to the cloud somehow, which means you add a cellular phone for these, and I don't think too many of them have that yet for the battery life reason. Or you have to relay. You could go Wi-Fi to an access point and up, and then you have the challenge of not always being connected. I mean, Wi-Fi is becoming more ubiquitous, but it's not an always connected network. So I think there's some challenges there, but again, I think this is going to get down to some vertical markets, and people will find markets where, whether it's a cloud service or some sort of other app, that's where the value add is.
Cloud is core to our offering. So we do have the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth radios, and so we're not maybe always connected, but I tether to my phone, and that's usually connected, and I'm able to get out. And that's, I think, a really important part of what we're doing. You know, the push notifications from the phone, as are done on the MetaWatch, are really important. We do those, but the data that's acquired, getting it up to a server and getting it viewable. I mean, I met somebody earlier tonight who's here from Nike, right? And with that watch, you can get a nice sort of Nike Plus, get a tracking of the run you took, right? And that's all because it syncs back up. Now, I believe that has to be connected to a computer. We just do it wirelessly the next time we're connected, which is about once an hour.
Yeah, I think those kind of sports applications, like you mentioned, are going to be one of the big ones. In fact, in surveying the high school kids informally, most of them have a watch, and it's a sports watch, and they use it for running or various sports, even though they don't wear it on a day-to-day basis in class. So I think those are the types of applications that are going to cause the computer watch to take off.
Just to comment on that, in our company, you know, the cloud is a place where it's your personal repository. It collects all your data that you've collected out there on the slopes or wherever you are.
So your products transmit that data to the cloud?
Via the mobile phone. So we connect to smartphones. So you can see when you get a text message or a phone call directly in your display.
Do you charge a subscription for that, storing that data?
Well, that's not yet, but
you provide a continual service to your customer for a one-time fee.
First, it's all about attracting people to the party, right? So what we're doing is we're selling the hardware, and we're doing everything we can through Android Marketplace, through interesting apps, through instant sharing of information and community and social media to increase the user base. And then obviously once you've got that user base down the line, you can feed some of that data back to the user. I talked about contextual analytics, which will add value to, but will also add value to us in terms of monetizing this.
For everybody else, what do you think? I mean, these products are all, unlike, you know, you buy a Patek Philippe that's a watch. I mean, you have it. It doesn't, aside from a service or something, the company doesn't have to support it. With your products, you've got to run servers.
Yep.
And when you're looking to invest, go ahead.
Rafe,
how do you make that business work?
Qualcomm has an interesting health network. They're very much into the M-Health, as they call it. And they have something called CNET, which they've announced, It's basically cloud storage, HIPAA compliant, secure from a device up to the cloud over a cellular network for storing your medical information. So if you have this watch that's doing health monitoring, whether you have a condition or not, it can be constantly storing your vitals up in the cloud. Your doctor can monitor it. It's got a secure access to it as well. And they're promoting this as a cloud service.
Well, what I'm getting at is, did Microsoft have it right with Spot, which is that that these are subscription services? And will the customer go for that?
We believe no. And Bill brought up that was perhaps one of the failures of the Spot watch, but getting someone to pay yet another subscription is tough. I think in the early days of the Kindle, we saw that people much preferred to buy something where the cost of the data services were built in. And they had ways to subsidize that through book sales and other things, and I think we'll start to find some of those ways on devices like this.
All this talk about cloud services and watches, I think one of the things we learned, and Dave Rosales, my partner, and I, we've shipped, I'd say, kind of going back to Spot, Palm, what we did with Sony Ericsson, what we've done with MetaWatch, we've shipped somewhere between 150 and 200,000 of these things. So we have lots of scars on our back. Some of these things worked very, very, very well. Some didn't. My opinion, consumers aren't going to move too far, too fast. That's the one thing that every one of us has to understand is that, the watch's been around for 100 years. And everybody in the world understands that motion. I don't have to be wearing a watch. If I do that, anybody in the world knows instantly what I've just done. And the problem with that is that when something is that well known, it limits people from seeing what the additional potential can be for these kinds of devices. So I think we have to take small, careful steps to get into this thing. And in my view, these watches are much more about what I call contact than they are content.
We're going to go to audience questions in just a second. Remember, if you have a question, please text it to that number, which I can't read from where I am, and it'll get up to here. Now, these markets, these products are still developing. What do you want in your next product, and what help do you need in creating that?
Better energy density in batteries, right? Bill talked about battery life. That's a constant struggle for us. We've come up with a dual processor architecture so that we can shut down the ARM11 that I brought up earlier most of the day and still have a readable watch with a small microprocessor. But still we're running on a 230 milliamp hour battery, and that is about 1/10 the size of your cell phone battery. And we really need to see some enhancements there.
Bill, Dan?
There hasn't been a great deal happening in battery chemistry, as Tim has said. So that's, and I don't anticipate that. I think what's going to drive this, I think, are a couple of things. Number one is, these devices that we carry are the most addictive things in the world. Once you get hooked on these things, man, you can't put them down. And more and more of what's coming to these devices is pushed to it. It's not we're using these devices to go browse the web. Mm-hmm. It's coming in the forms of vibrations and sounds, and we don't know why that's happening. So all that plays well to what we're trying to do, which is help people do what they're already trying to do, which is why'd that thing just vibrate? That's our job. If we do our job very well, if you're using our watch, you'll pull your phone out half as many times as you do today. And that's going to save you a lot of time. It's going to save a lot of battery. It's just going to take some of the friction out of this mobile lifestyle.
Dan?
Mm-hmm. I think everything that we need is there today. Obviously, battery, huge constraint. And I think most manufacturers of electronic devices will say the same. And for us, putting something on your face is really important that it's low weight, looks good, and so forth. So that goes without saying, but apart from that, I think in terms of the MEMS revolution that we've seen, the micro-electromechanical sensors, the miniaturization, and I think even the power management of these systems, it's all there. So we're really looking at obviously reducing price point so we can get it up to the masses, but before that happens, it's really on the user adoption, that we need people to take quite a big step. I agree with you, Bill, about, it's this motion people are familiar with, and I think I love these watches. I'm going to go out and buy one myself. So I think it's great, but I think we're going to see, just like we saw with GPS devices, moving from the automotive industry, first being built into the console, then you could buy them mountable on the dashboard, and then they went into a myriad of devices. And I personally now have 3 or 4 different GPS devices. I think we're going to see that as well. With this, the technology is there. Now it's all about the proliferation into different applications and user adoption. That's my perspective.
I think we got to come up with a better term
when you buy your device.
Great, thanks.
I think if we call this thing wearable computing, we'll never get out of the rut we're in.
Let's not call it computing.
Let's call it functional jewelry. Let's.
I don't know. Rich, what do you think? Invest in. What are you looking for?
Well, I think, to answer the question you asked about new technologies helping this along, I do think there's a lot playing into this marketplace. First of all, Moore's Law, the continued march of more capability at the same amount of power and at lower cost. And so the power problem gets better every year. The amount of memory that you can put in one of these things. I mean, one of my investment theses is at the asymptote, memory is unlimited and free. Now, the memory guys don't like to think about that, but it is unbelievable how much memory you can now put into a very small device. And I think the thing that's a relatively new trend that, frankly, a lot of people aren't familiar with that really plays to this well is stacking of die within a chip. Now, people talk about multi-chip modules now, and that tends to be where you put 2 die side by side. But now what they're doing is stacking them in 3 dimensions. And these dies are so thin that the only issue, by the way, that they really haven't solved is how you get the thermal problem dealing with the middle chip creating heat and how do you get that out. But the amount of density of processing power you're going to be able to fit into that small device is growing exponentially over the next few years. This is new technology that's really just happening.
We're going to end up with great wrist tans from all the heat being
That's right.
All right, so your questions here. By the way, I do note that, as somebody said here in one of the questions, why are these questions not appearing on my watch? Or in my glasses? How come? You guys got your work cut out for you. All right, how are you going to differentiate? This is an interesting question because it presupposes something. How are you going to differentiate against the 800-pound gorilla, which is Apple? As I said briefly, the iPod Nano is basically the size of a big fat watch, and some geeks are wearing it as watches. And some of the Kickstarter bands, they're gorgeous. Are you worried about Apple, and how are you going to play against that?
I'll jump in on that. I think it'll be the greatest boost to this category the world's ever seen. Do
you think Apple's going to do it?
Yeah, I do. And I can tell you why. I believe, just my opinion, is number one, if there's a company that really understands the value of a simple user experience, it's Apple. And having worn a Bluetooth watch in conjunction with my phones since 2005, so I've been using these products now for almost 7 years. It's really convenient. And I'll tell you, convenience, a super feature in any product. I mean, just a quick analysis here. How many of you own a microwave? Raise your hand. How many of you also own a stove? I mean, that's my point, is that convenience in our lives really matters.
Are you going to do a wrist microwave?
No, no. The chip that Rich has got is going to take care of that.
I'll make a comment on Apple jumping in.
Yeah,
but what I was going to say is they're going to validate the market. They're going to own the iOS world, and everybody in the Android world, Windows Phone 7 world, RIM world, and all the other guys are going to be looking for their solutions, which is what, 80% of the market? So, hey, I've been hoping they'd come in from day one.
Really? Because just jumping in here, Apple makes beautiful devices, but they don't make jewelry.
True.
And
True. And I think that's going to be one of the big issues there. But take a look at the margins in the jewelry business, in the watch business.
Oh, they're so depressing.
They are
if
incredible.
You're buying a watch, yeah.
And now think about just kind of the issues that arise from asymmetrical competition. Is Apple going to sell this stuff where watches are sold today? I don't think so. Apple's channel is so much less costly than the fashion watch business channel, there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of risks, and there's a lot of margin on this. So, my opinion.
The cost of goods are substantially more. I mean, I talked to the fashion watch guys, and they say, and you know this well, that COGS 10x is how they price some of their watches, and that's just not feasible in electronics.
Well, I think if you take a look at the costed bill of material of a watch, you'll find 95% of the bill of materials on the outside, 5% is on the inside. Yep. And consumer electronics, it's the inverse of this.
Except for Apple. Rich?
Yeah, I was going to make a comment. A lot of people think that Apple got into the cell phone business to dominate the cell phone business. An interesting little tidbit that came out of Walter Isaacson's interviews with Steve Jobs was that it was actually a defensive move. That Apple had this huge business in iPods, in delivering music, and they realized that in the long run that was a feature and not a standalone product that would be built into every phone. And so they got into the phone business as a defensive, not an offensive move. So it's interesting, if you think that all of this functionality will eventually be here, I think Apple's smart enough to view it as a defensive move that they're going to have to go there. Now it's a question of timing.
I want to stay on you a second, Rich. We have a question here about hardware startups. There seems to be a negative feeling towards hardware startups in Silicon Valley, especially with all these Web 2.0 companies that take $10,000 and a closet full of ramen to get started. How, if you want to make a hardware product, what is the feeling in the Valley about funding a hardware product like one of these, if there's another one in this space?
Well, you know, you have to view hardware as a big category.
Right.
Wearable computers is a small subset of that. But I think there are fewer VCs doing hardware today than there were, 10 years ago. And that's because the capital efficiency. It takes a lot more money, whether it be a semiconductor company hardware or a systems company, which means you have hardware and software to develop. The cost to develop those things are higher. And it's a matter of capital efficiency. So there's fewer doing it, but to me that's an opportunity. If you have a compelling business plan, there are still guys, me, doing hardware investments. I mean, I consider myself a hardware guy.
You invested in Dust.
Yes, I did.
One of the coolest companies ever.
Thank you.
What happened there?
We just sold the company to Linear Technologies.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
A question here on developing apps or products. How does feedback for your products differ between men and women? Do they have the same needs, the same likes or dislikes, also adults versus children? If you're building a hardware product, an accessory product, a fashion product, or an application on those products, how are things different among the major demographics?
Gadgets are kind of a guy's thing right now. The reality is we've tried to create, call them smart watches, during my years at Fossil for ladies, and it's hard. It's really hard. You've got just the physiological differences. Wrists are smaller, and it's the buying motivations, the psychology of why a lady would buy a product differs from a guy. And to be honest with you, I think that's it's going to be a much harder, longer road to appeal to women with these kinds of devices. We will eventually, but I think it's going to take longer.
I think that's true for the generic smartwatch. I think the purpose-built devices, it's a different story. So the runner's watch, I see a tremendous amount of women wearing, Garmin running watches or whatever brands are out there, and I think that if you could find the right niche, and it may not be something they wear all day long, it might be something that's put on for a particular use case and then taken off, then I think you'll find the market opening up a little more broadly.
Dan, when you're talking about sports, does activity kind of trump gender? I mean, is this a universal product?
For sure, about 90% of our customers are males.
Oh, so I'm wrong. Okay.
Yeah. So, well, for the snow vertical there, but I think we'll see as we go into the endurance sports with the sunglass solution, especially running, you're seeing tremendous growth there with the women buying these sports performance watches, and we'll connect to all of them. So we have a good install base there to tap into. Then I think it's going to change.
People are also asking, what applications besides skiing are you looking at?
We are in 6 different verticals. So we call it snow, so it's skiing, snowboarding, snowmobiling. Dirt is motocross and mountain bike. Then we're in water, which is scuba diving, swimming, kite surfing, and windsurfing. We're also in motorcycling, which is full-face motorcycling helmets. Basically, still using the same platform. You can see heads-up heads-up navigation and still take your calls. And we've got professional applications, so industrial application, welding helmets, and military. So we're really all over the place.
So you have military contracts?
Not contracts yet. We are working with military players at the moment.
Any of you other folks looking at military products or affiliated with parts of your companies that are doing that? iRobot, for example, they've got basically two little companies there, one consumer, one military.
We've had a couple of military defense contractors evaluating it, but no formal programs.
I think we're sort of in the same boat. There's an Android initiative going on in the Department of Defense that's fairly interesting. That's sparked a lot of interest in our products.
Speaking of Android, we have a question. Why did you decide to work? The folks closest to me are Android products. Bill, your product is not.
But
you're hopefully
compatible
agnostic.
with Android.
What's that?
It's compatible with Android.
What does that mean? You mean it'll beep if my Android phone gets an alert?
So this talks about
Yes,
the
the answer is
plumbing.
yes.
Okay. So let's talk about the operating system. Why not Android, Bill, briefly, and then why did you guys look at Android as opposed to, say, I don't know, QNX or something like that? Bill.
Well, supporting Android requires a lot of power. It requires a big processor. And to solve the problem that we were trying to solve, it wasn't a requirement. It's overkill.
But in order to build apps on your product, now you have to have people who
Well,
specialize.
that's a really good point, because you don't have to build apps on our product. Our architecture allows an existing app on an Android platform to completely control everything on this watch. So in a matter of literally within an hour or less, a lot of these app developers, let's say a running app, or let's say a music streaming app that wants to push their user experience to the wrist, can do so without having to develop a new code base that lives over here. It uses our remote protocol and APIs to literally push those messages to the wrist.
That's very interesting, Tim, because Tim's strategy sounds like the complete opposite of that. So discuss why you went to a traditional operating system and not the reverse.
Well, so we didn't want to be dependent on the phone. The phone is a great thing to push notifications at times, but you know, you go out for your run, to use the example we just been talking about, you don't necessarily want to have your phone bumping along in your pocket. So we looked out there and we actually considered a couple of different alternatives. And we looked at the growth rate of Android. We looked at, you guys have heard the stats. Mine's probably old, but it was 700,000 Android phones being activated every day, right? It's just unbelievable growth. That means you've got a developer community out there that knows how to code Android apps and is excited about building for the platform. And it also, back to the Apple question, we would love to see Apple get into the space as well, because we're the Android alternative to the iOS solution. So.
Android alternative to the iOS solution?
To the iOS solution.
Okay.
So Apple can have their stack, and we do work with iPhones, but there's so many people out there, companies that will not have access to iOS to customize for their products, that they can use our platform using Android to do it.
Dan, why Android?
I'd love to see Apple get into the wrist watch space, because it'll take them longer to get into the heads-up display space. But
they might. Apple. They might say, "The wrist is dead. We're going straight to the eyeball."
That's
then you're toast.
Yeah, well, I do think that it's good to have strong players in the market. So it was more a joke. My reasons are the same as Tim's. We were evaluating going with an RTOS, or we should go with an embedded Linux, which is sort of the two choices we had back in 2009. It was pretty clear with what was going on at the moment with the buzz around Android, Google adopting it, and we saw this going in a direction where we could just ride this wave, and we're really happy with that choice.
Here's a great question. How do you expect the mobile advertising and app monetization to evolve with the smaller form factors on wearables? How should mobile ad providers then gear or prepare themselves for the changing mobile ad landscape? What time is it? Time for a sandwich. No, I have a meeting. How are you going to make that?
So we were fortunate enough to have our product at CES in the Alcatel-Lucent booth. And they had a very, very interesting demo that showed a location-based service scenario where somebody walks into a brick-and-mortar retail store. They've opted in for offers and incentives to be pushed to them. And when they walked into the store, their presence in the store was noted. So at that moment, when they walk in the store, an offer is pushed to them. Now this is where I think a device on your wrist has incredible value. A lot of people don't shop one-handed. You know, they're not walking around with a phone in one hand and shopping with the other. They got their hands free. Guys are carrying their phone in their pocket. Ladies are carrying their phone in their handbag. And so in that scenario, you've got less than 1 minute to deliver the goods. The offer is gone. So if you think, and this kind of then sort of suggests where there's some interesting strategic partnerships and business models that can be done. As I said before, these kinds of watches can be the FedEx of push notifications. And some people really like these notifications delivered to people at certain times. And it's just not in terms of location-based services. It could be for medicine. It could be for patient reminders on medication. There's some important applications around that ability.
I can certainly see this being very attractive in theory to advertisers and to retailers, but I wonder how consumers will pick it up, will feel about a piece of jewelry saying, have a Starbucks.
Yeah, you don't want your jewelry spamming you.
Yeah, I mean, comments on how we're going to make that work? Because that is such a key part of the smartphone economy.
I don't think that's just our problem to solve. It's our problem to be aware of. But like I said, all of us, and us in particular, we're selling products on kind of an attach rate driven business model. Mm-hmm. So we're not selling the whole solution. We're part of this ecosystem there. And I think that's an industry-wide problem. How are they going to deal with these kinds of things?
Yeah. So I agree that traditional sort of banner advertising models don't necessarily work. You know, our screen is 1 inch square. There's not a whole lot of real estate there to push messages. However, there's some interesting things happening with maybe in-app purchase and freemium models that are interesting. So, for example, let's take a very popular handheld game today, Angry Birds, right? And imagine that.
Do you have Angry Birds on your platform?
Someone has rooted our device. Yes, we do.
Do you know Angry Birds? Doesn't matter.
Someone has rooted our device and hacked it and put it on.
Angry Birds?
Not yet, but it could.
Dead.
So Angry Birds
not
is, let me just be the first to admit, the full-fledged Angry Birds is a little silly on our device. Okay. But let's say they wanted to have you hatch your own bird and have it be a digipet and pay for that privilege and grow them and take care of them before they get into the game. This is a really interesting place to do that. And so, you know, linking those two together and moving data between, in this case, the phone and WIMM module, and allowing a purchase here to show up here and to continue to buy or spend here becomes very interesting.
I think advertising in our space is going to be huge. I mean, think about it. You've got an accelerometer, you know, gyroscope. You've got all kinds of sensors up there that can detect your gaze direction and duration. So we'll know how long, what you're looking at, and how long you spend looking at it. So whether you're interested in it or not, and then based on your location, we can feed back information to you. But it's still something you opt in for. You say, okay, I like snowboards, so I want to be informed about good offers. And because we're in action sports, you know, you're out there on the snow hill. You're collecting your data. You have your history up in the cloud. You know, if you walk past the snow shop in the village, you may want to know about an offer there for a bird and snowboard. And we'll know you want it because we can see that you've improved your skill. You may have just clocked exceeded your last recorded max speed. So you're now going 90 kilometers per hour instead of 60. So, but we know your snowboard maybe is just a beginner snowboard. So, we can communicate this instantly. And I think that's really why there's going to be such a big price tag to this from companies out there. That it's not something that's going to be in your pocket, in your phone, and you're going to miss the opportunity, because we get bombarded with impressions. I think it's about catching you in the moment exactly when you're near one of these.
There's going to be a lot of guys in trouble when their wives can look up what they've been looking at.
True. I think privacy is huge here, and I'm not saying we should bombard everybody with these. I think it's an opt-in, and it's valuable, it's relevant information given the context. And if you don't want that, you should never get it. But it should be something where it's like a Groupon. You get it, hey, it's great, I want this.
We have a technology question here. What about energy harvesting? I know I talked to some Navy guys 10 years ago. They have energy harvesting in submarines for sensors that have to run all the time. Anybody who read Dune knows that.
There was a VLab event on that 6 months ago, maybe. And from my perspective, it's not there yet for what we need. But watching it closely, because that would be tremendous.
200 years ago, was it 200 years ago? 100 years ago, we had automatic watches. I still have one of my great-grandfather's. It winds itself. How come you guys can't do that?
I'm wearing my energy harvesting watch right now.
Yeah.
I just move it.
No, seriously. I mean, we have the technology. This part of our
Well,
body
I think
is
the
always in
real
motion.
issue is there's an imbalance between the amount of energy it can collect and the amount of energy it takes to drive those family members we got in here. Those radios, those accelerometers, those vibrating motors consume a lot more power than we can harvest. And so it's
the amount of space required to harvest the amount of energy you need.
True. Okay, we don't want to make it any
it's a
bigger.
trade-off.
We should have brought the solar clothing guys to the wearable event.
Let's see. Remember, text your questions to that number up there. Could the panel comment on the potential for wearable devices that don't come with the screen, like the Jawbone Up, which is, you guys are all familiar with that. That's a fitness monitoring thing. It has an accelerometer, it fits on your wrist. And the Fitbit, which is borderline because it has a little tiny screen, but you have to kind of unclip it to use it. What about the market for sensors like that?
I think it's huge, and I think that part of our strategy is to work with and talk to these other devices that people will wear. There needs to be ultimately a place it gets displayed. With the Up, you're plugging into your smartphone and getting the data for display there. But if I had a shoe fob or a heart rate monitor or the blood glucose monitor I talked about earlier, getting all those sensors in the body to this one central brain, collecting that data, and not only letting the user see it, but ultimately syncing it up to the cloud so that a physician can see it, I think is absolutely important.
I think it depends. It depends on the use case. It depends what this sensor is doing. I mean, we've got, there's millions of sensors in the world, and a lot of them need a voice and a face. And that's what a display really is for a lot of these sensors. It becomes the voice and face for these. In the case of something like Fitbit or Jawbone, I think what they're doing is great. But I would also think that, if I had feedback from those products halfway through the day that told me I'm falling behind schedule, it'd be a lot more valuable than giving me the information at the end of the day when the day's over and there are already results. We've already kind of booked that. And being able to get that real-time feedback in a convenient way, I think is a powerful motivator. And let's face it, everybody in the world knows how to glance. You don't have to teach it. Glance doesn't have to be taught. That's something that everyone can do. And I think the trick to it is making sure that what we deliver to these consumers can be consumed in a glance. And that kind of goes back to our wrist PDA and our WristNet, the MSN SpotWatch days was we gave a lot too much content that you couldn't consume in a glance. You had to press buttons, and this is just, as a product designer, what we learned is you really have to have tremendous respect for the I/O limitations of these small form factors. And these small form factors are almost all O, very little I. And so you have to be very, very careful about what you present.
The catch with these sort of single function devices is, what's the value proposition to you for it? I mean, I got an early Fitbit, and I wore it for a few weeks, and I found, how much exercise I get every day, and then I kind of didn't need it anymore, right? Because I know how far I jog and how many steps and how many calories I burn out of my jog and how much I get during a typical work day, which was really depressing. But then I didn't need it anymore, so I didn't find it had an ongoing utility. So I think you got to get the right functionality. But if you're somebody who's like trying to measure every last calorie every day and you're just hardcore at it, then you might find a use for it.
I think it also goes back to your iPhone being a defensive move comment. Those things are mostly features that can get rolled into other devices over time.
Absolutely. That's why I say you've got to get the right combination of features for the right audience to have an ongoing value proposition. Otherwise, it's a cool gadget that you put in the drawer.
We really love sensors because we connect to them, and that makes our platform more valuable. We still think people want this readout. I agree with you, Bill. I think they want the readout. I think they love sharing it afterwards. I think they love post-processing it and doing all kinds of stuff with it. But I do think that it adds a tremendous amount of value to have access to it in real time. We partnered with Polar last week, so we get heart rate now up in our applications. We'll continue to add these sensor peripherals to our platform. So we embrace it. I think there's a huge market in this space.
You guys have done a series on the event on the quantified self, yeah? This is all about this. This is what I talk about when I said people are just like nuts for data collection.
We want to build avatars of yourself so we can import them back into a computer game afterwards, and you can see how good you've become because you've actually done this in real life. And we can merge this with Xbox Live. I mean, there's a million things you can do in this world.
There was somebody upstairs who, there's a question here, somebody upstairs was actually doing this. Will mobile payments or identification be a trend in smartwatches, or is it here right now? And there's a follow-up question to that.
Yeah. Well, so there was a company that had NFC watches upstairs, and that is really interesting. Today we do it with optical. So you get your Starbucks card, and there's a number on the back. You tap it in here, and we generate the barcode. And so every time you go to Starbucks, you just swipe your wrist in front of the scanner. So I think it does have huge potential.
So this could be the wallet?
Yes.
What do you guys
Absolutely.
think?
I agree.
Really?
Yep.
Which brings up the next question. What happens if these devices are stolen? How vulnerable are they to hacking, and is there a remote kill switch?
We have a remote kill switch, so at any time you can go to our website and say kill the device, and it will wipe it. They're strapped to your body. Your cell phone's not strapped to your body, right? You leave your iPhone 4 prototype in a bar.
But it's also conspicuous.
It is conspicuous, yeah.
I call it discreet.
Let me see that. Show me your watch. Yeah, okay, yeah. Let me see the, anyway. So, no, seriously, do you think that, is security an issue with these devices? I mean, they might be strapped on, but they carry a lot of data and they're very small.
Security is always an issue with any of these devices, particularly in financial kinds of transactions. I mean, we're looking at NFC, and we're looking at NFC from a financial perspective, but I think there's lots of different issues that have to be ironed out on that. But NFC is an interesting sensor for other kinds of non-financial transactions too. So I would envision NFC being probably something you'd likely see in our products and other wearables in the future.
Well, the big topic in mobile computing now in the enterprise is the bring your own device phenomenon, right? It used to be IT gave you whatever computer they gave you, and now it's no, I pick out my own phone and I want IT to work with it. And it's a real issue right now, and so the IT departments are coming out with software applications. Mobile Iron is the most popular one now, to be able to do things like destroy the information or cover, have policies set for what corporate information you can set down. And as soon as this goes here, they're going to have to do the same thing.
Oh, IT guys must be like
they're going to love it.
Happy as clams. I'm going to have to support everybody's wristwatch now. I've got a job for the next 3 lifetimes.
But one point is, in our particular case, we're really a dumb terminal. There's nothing to really kill, unless you want to kill time. No pun intended. No pun intended. Sorry, I know that was unfair. But seriously, I mean, it's the difference between a device that you wear as really it's a dumb terminal, as opposed to something that you've got a lot of valuable content stored in a platform type device.
All right, with that, we're going to have to wrap it up. Dan Eisenhardt, CEO of Recon Instruments. Tim Twerdahl is VP of Product at WIMM. Bill Geiser, CEO of MetaWatch. Rich Redelfs is General Partner at Foundation Capital. I'm Rafe Needleman from CNET. Thank you all very much. I'm going to hand it over.
Yeah, thank you, Ray.